that's where you see an intersection of the two. So an organization might employ a data scientist to say, hey, we've got a whole bunch of data, we want to wring meaning from that. And so a KMIM person would be very interested in that conversation. But KMIM is so much more broad than data science in that sense, in the context of an organization and all the things that go on. Yeah. Now, in terms of studying, I don't think, so data science is actually quite new. So I can't tell you whether we have students who typically take both. That's actually emerging. I can't actually say that right now. I think it's a logical connection. I think for data science students, the key is to actually turn over a lot of stones, look outside your concentration and see what can you connect to science to. And I think KMIM would be a logical choice, but there's many choices. On the KMIM side, my question typically is, how can you be better at understanding people's information behavior? So that means taking LIS courses, that means taking ARM courses, ISD actually, so process innovation. So depending on which side you're coming from, the other one might be a little bit different to behold. Oh, Kelsey, heads up, everyone, the session is being recorded. Right, okay, good. Thanks for that reminder, Kelsey. So I'm not sure if I answered your question or perhaps made you more confused. But if it's the latter, the upside here is that you really just need focus on one concentration, I would say, to write a really good statement of intent on your application. Once you get to the iSchool, people change concentrations, people shift around, people do parts of other concentrations. I think that the really diverse buffet table is a real strength, even though it can seem kind of confusing. I think it's important to understand that we're not going to slot you into one concentration and say you must stay there. It's actually very much the opposite. So feeling ambivalent, I actually see that as a good sign. I'm going to take that as a proxy for curiosity. All right. Oh, there's more people in here now. All right, awesome. So guys, you can, by all means, if you want to talk, by all means, please do, or you could type questions into the chat box. Quiet group. It's like this when we do it in person too, only I seem to be better at provoking questions in person, face to face. I can start asking you guys questions. What other concentrations are you thinking about? Kaylee, thank you. You have a question regarding information systems design in KMIM. And you know the KMIM focused on knowledge and how they've been used within an organization. Is there any connection between the two? Yeah, there is. So there is actually. If we're building an information system to be used in an organization, so the obvious go-to is like an intranet or a corporate portal, the ISD folks are going to be very interested in deconstructing the steps or the processes, and they will take a very analytic, engineering-oriented view. What they won't do is actually think about behavior and culture and policy. So KMIM brings a behavioral side and an information behavioral side specifically to the equation. ISD folks are more on the technical, not exactly how do we engineer this, but how do we structure business processes. So they'll be very much on the sort of the back end, the underpinnings. But if you don't, put it another way, if ISD people build an intranet and they never talk to any KMIM people or UXD people, they're likely to build something that people find quite difficult to use because it may not really line up with their information practices. It may really not line up with their needs, and that may be an easy to solve problem. It's not to say that they built entirely the wrong thing. It may just be what faces users may actually not be sensible to users. So that's another way to look at it. Yeah. And so we do see people taking courses from one versus the other, and I think that's a really good thing. Okay. Website under Kevin talks about health informatics. Kevin, I think you may have been the student who said, what concentration would be best if I'm interested in a career in health informatics? I saw someone said that, and they were all whipping by really quickly, and I may try to make a mental note. So if that's you, I've got two answers. One is, there's the easy answer and the harder answer. The easier answer is, yeah, health is lumped in under KMIM. We don't do health informatics courses directly. There's two things. There's health librarianship, which is actually not a bad thing to do if you're interested in health. But the other thing is that we have a partnership with the Master of Health Informatics program, which is at the School of Public Health. Now, I'm cross-appointed there, so I know that landscape a little bit. There are a couple of courses where there are spaces reserved for iSchool students. Not many. Some years those spaces fill up, some years they go empty. But the two introductory courses in the Health Informatics program would be what you would probably want to do, and typically you take those in second year. My second answer is if you're really hell-bent on health informatics, you should also be looking at applying to the health informatics program, because that is all what they do. They go deep in health informatics. They don't have the breadth we do. So it's not that one is better than the other. It really gets down to whether do you want to do health informatics deep, or do you want to bolt health informatics onto a wider range of study that could make you in a lot of ways more employable. That's difficult. The generalist versus the specialist. Hard one to answer. And we could have a conversation offline too, Kevin, if you want, because there's a lot to talk about there. Okay. Oh, and Kaylee's thinking about these two concentrations. Yeah, you know what? Go for it. What I say to people about multiple concentrations is this. It feels like, you're at the buffet table, you paid for the all-you-can-eat, you want to get as many concentrations in as possible. The reality is you're doing 16 courses one way or the other. No one's ever going to look at your transcript or care which concentration or concentrations you finished. The key is what narrative can you construct about what you are, what you're good at, what you like, and what you do. So that's a long way of saying you could take 2 or 3 or 4 of the required courses for another concentration, not do the course that is not of interest to you, and that's just as valuable. So rather than thinking about how many concentrations, I think it makes sense to figure out what are you interested in? What concentration is the closest fit? Now, what other courses can you pile onto that to extend and expand that? And if they're all in one concentration, great, but they might not be. So it's a different way of looking at things. Andre asks, would KMIM have the most focus on privacy and ethics? I would actually say critical information policy studies would. That's we'd expect to see most of that. We're more process oriented, and when I talk about information behavior, we do some of that in KMIM, and they do some of that in LIS. But I would actually say for the subjects you just mentioned, critical information policy studies courses would be the place to look. That said, we do some of it in 1003. We do some of it in 1003, so you do touch on it. Yeah, maybe you take 1003 first, and then you decide whether you want more, and if so, that there might be a critical information policy studies for you. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm getting praise, Kevin and Kaylee. Thank you. It's hard to know how I'm being when I'm staring at a camera without the body language. And if I'm answering not quite the right question, come back, rephrase your question by all means, because I honestly can't tell. While I'm waiting for the next question, I'll offer up my own perspective on what the grad school experience is going to be like under COVID. I am anticipating, based on what I know, and I do spend a bit of time on COVID and COVID status, I'm optimistic that we're going to be in person in September. And I suspect that what we will probably do is try and support people who want to be or need to be remote because they can't travel, because there's safety concerns, because we're not all the way there. But I would be very surprised if we're not doing a fair bit of in-person learning by the fall. No promises, no promises. That's just speculation. But that's I think there's plenty of good reason to be optimistic. And it's not just the vaccine schedule, as Professor Lyons said, it's the fact that COVID will retreat in the summer. And that gives us a few months to actually try and get caught up with vaccinations and get that deployed. So I feel optimistic. Distance learning, we've been coping. Our students have been resilient. I think it's actually going very well. But I think all of us would prefer to be in person if we could. And so that's something that I'm certainly keenly looking forward to. Okay, any other questions or questions about co-op? Oh, here we go, Kevin, yes. Oh, by the way, please call me Colin. I don't like being called professor. Just call me Colin. This is grad school. It's much more preferred. You're just wondering, are co-op placements based on concentration? Yes, they are. Although some positions, when they're advertised, are appropriate for more than one concentration. So positions don't always slot neatly in, but often they do. If someone's looking for an archivist, they're looking for an archivist. If they're looking for a user experience designer, it's that. KMIM co-op positions, they are in hospitals sometimes. They are in law firms sometimes, and they are in government sometimes. Those are the main areas. Other organizations take them too. But the job descriptions for co-op place KMIM tend to be the most diverse, and I see that as a strength. It makes it a little bit harder to find because you don't have your one search term. You can't just plug in a word like archivist. However, it does give you a broader set of choices, and KMIM students do well in co-op placements because of that flexibility. All right, what else you guys got? And here we go, Kaylee again, thank you. What is practicum exactly for MI? You heard that practicum would have a greater chance to learn. Not sure I would agree with that. It's apples and oranges. So practicum is a single half course, and you can take that in second year. There's two different ones, actually, a small one and a big one. The small one is for special libraries. So for you, you're probably looking at just the bigger one. I can't remember the course number off the top of my head. And it is basically, it's 100 hours of a place in an organization. It's unpaid. You don't have to find that. We find that. In other words, there is a great big long list of projects, and you take the project that you would like to do. So you get to control that. So you get a fair bit of control that way. But it's 100 hours, typically sort of a day a week during the course of the term, to do one project. It's a good resume builder for sure, because you can talk about a project you did, as well as, I mean, it really counts in a sense as employment. So it's useful that way, but it's small scale because 100 hours isn't much. Co-op is bigger scale. It's 4 months or 8 months, and it's full time. I mean, that's all you're doing. So you're at a workplace full time. So it's hundreds of hours. I think it's something like 480 hours. So it's 4 to 5 times bigger than a practicum placement. It is paid, and obviously that allows you to go broader and deeper. You cannot do 2 co-op placements. You can't do a full co-op load and practicum. We call that too much field experience, although maybe that rule will change, but you could mix 1 co-op placement with a practicum course. So it's also not an either or necessarily. You could do both if you do it that way. Yeah. The other thing, the difference between practicum and co-op is practicum, as I say, there's a long list of projects, and you're guaranteed not only a project, but a project that you get to pick. Co-op is very much the opposite. There are more people interested in doing co-op than there are full-time placements. Every year, well, COVID aside, every year our co-op positions grow. There's really 2 kinds. One is companies that come just to us because they know our students, and often they're graduates of our program who are coming back. They're a co-op student, and those are fantastic. But a majority of co-op placements are still ones that are open competition. So if Deloitte or PricewaterhouseCoopers or the Ministry of Labor or SHI or what have you, if they're looking to hire a co-op student, they want to cast a wide net. So most commonly, you're competing with the rest of the world, but there are some positions, a growing number, that they really do come just to us. Andre, for someone employed as a manager of information teams, would you say that KMIM is more appropriate to augment skills and creds? Your dilemma is you also like to play with the data. So, my call-out answer for that, which is a great question, Andre, is that you're going to have to kind of find out. That is to say, it's kind of an empirical question. But that's not bad news. That's good news, because you've got 16 courses. And if you're coming part-time, which sounds like you might be, even better, because you get to sort of stretch experience and the reflection on what these courses are doing for you. Okay, part-time, fantastic. So I would start with KMIM. And I think it will augment your creds for sure, and I think your skills too. I think it will actually show you a very different way of doing your work, but that's going to take some time to sink in. The thing about KMIM is it's not that we can equip you in the course of a really exciting 3-hour lecture to do things differently. It's meditative in terms of coming to terms with what does it make sense for people, like what does it mean for people to encounter information? What does it mean for them to internalize that? The transformation from information to knowledge is an invisible process. It's more nuanced, and I think a lot of this you already know. It's more nuanced than, say, user experience design or ISD, where you've got flow charts and you've got tangible things. And so I think the learning of KMIM, and by the way, I did my PhD at the faculty in KMIM, I think it takes longer for it to soak in. And I think the other thing I think is that the more, I'm quite convinced of this, the more work experience you bring with you, the more you get out of KMIM. So I'm bullish for you on KMIM, but there's no reason why you shouldn't take an ISD course. And if human-centered data science is something that interests you, I think you could take a course or two there too. Absolutely. So I see that dilemma is good news. We're a very diverse place, and so that kind of ambiguity or ambivalence or uncertainty, we can accommodate that. We can accommodate that within your degree. Other questions? Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, Andre. I really like, by the way, seeing people come into KMIM who have work experience that they can use as a way to make sense of what we're learning. It makes it more tangible. Yeah. Anyone else with questions around pairing concentrations, for example, trying to find those common threads? I don't see nearly enough people doing UXD and KMIM. Kaylee, you're thinking about pursuing a career in an international organization. Any suggestions for it in terms of using the knowledge we learned from school? Do you mean a specific international organization, or you just mean a large organization? That's where you see yourself. I think that's an important clarification. Okay. I would say there's nothing at the iSchool that either limits you or specifically orients you to that. I mean, KMIM is the go-to for being competent in large organizations. That's what KMIM is best for. But archives and records management, same, because there are national and international standards for managing information, for metadata. So I think ARM and KMIM are obvious choices for you. However, LIS, advocacy, critical information policy studies, that has a national and international scale as well. So there's a lot of possibilities there. And finally, taking a culture and technology course, nothing like comparing culture and technology directly, I think, to be able to develop a lexicon for being able to look at how technology lands differently in different cultures. I mean, literally different places, as opposed to just what we assume to be everywhere, which is our own context. So there is a lot there. I think we set up our grads really, really well to be able to cope, to be able to talk, to be able to thrive, and also impress on an international scale. And I can think of one of our grads who's a very senior person in the UN, probably about 7 or 8 years out now. And she did really well. All right, other questions? I'm not even sure actually how long this session goes for. I can stay as long as needed. Let me just look at this document and say we are here until 3, so we have tons of time. Okay, great. And you don't have to stay to be polite. If you've had enough, you can go. But I'm here for, look, if you have a question and you're wondering if it's a silly question, it's not. There are no silly questions. There are no dumb questions. I'm very, very interested in hearing from you. If you've got a question, someone else in the room has the same question. So very, very happy to hear anything you got. My pleasure, Kaylee. You too. Oh, here we go. Great, Andre. Am I one of the professors who will be teaching this concentration? Yes, I am. So our internationally renowned scholar in KM is Professor Chun-Wei Chu. He is starting to embark on phased retirement, so I think you will get him, but you'll be one of the last cohorts to do that. And those are shoes that are just, I think, too big to fill. So he's our main person. I am a teaching stream faculty member, so I teach in the concentration, absolutely. We also share instructors with archives and records management, and sometimes with LIS as well. So it's a broad array. And in fact, Professor Yu from ISD also teaches knowledge management. So it's a pretty wide group. I teach 1003. I used to teach every section of 1003. I've diversified a little bit more now. And these days, I'm actually teaching the work integrated learning preparation course called the Emerging Professional, which cuts across all concentrations. But if you come into KMIM, you would likely encounter me in 1003, which would be first term of first year. Job titles we look for at graduating with this concentration. Sure, Kevin. That's actually a tough one. It's pretty hard to rhyme them off because they're so incredibly diverse. People go into knowledge services in large organizations, so they could be the knowledge manager, they could be a portal manager, knowledge and content manager, at a more senior level, chief information officer, or more likely chief knowledge officer. But there are also analysts and consultants and project managers, depending on what else they have paired with KMIM. In other words, KMIM can be your career when it's one of those jobs, but very often KMIM is really a value add or an extender to someone's professional trajectory already. So they might be managing a team, they might be development managers, they might be software developers, they might be systems analysts. There's a whole wide range. If you are coming, let's say, out of undergrad and you don't have professional work experience and you do just KMIM, you're likely to be headed for a job in information management. That is to say, if you're going to come out through that kind of trajectory, information management, information and records management will tend to be where you land. And then, as I think I said in my spiel, you may be hired for that, but you'll be valued for knowledge management, for understanding policy, culture, behavior, for taking a non-naive view to the difference between knowledge and information. Other questions you guys might have? Full-time versus part-time studies, electives, co-op, practicums. Already had a couple questions like that. Okay, Taryn, hello. If I'm interested in this field in supply chain management, can I pursue a career in supply chain management based on what I've learned? Supply chain management is not something I know a lot about. So it's hard for me to give you a really informed answer. I think CAM would definitely feed into that. But what you would probably also want to do is at least one ISD course. I can think of one right off the top of my head, which is called Process Innovation. So you would certainly want to do that. Supply chain management. You might want to take one or more courses in mechanical and industrial engineering. So this is where U of T, being a really big place, can be a very useful thing. That you might find that is that's an interesting one. Cobbling together some courses through engineering as well as the iSchool. I haven't talked to someone who's wanted to do supply chain management. Yeah. I'd have to have a probably deeper conversation with you, and if you want to drop me an email, we could set up a time to chat, and you can tell me a little bit more about what supply chain management means to you, and we can try and work that out. I often stumped on a question, but you kind of got me there. Okay, for part-time, will there still be required courses held during the day during normal work hours? So what we do, required courses tend to be obviously very highly subscribed, which means we tend to have more than one section. Whenever we have more than one section, if humanly possible, the second section is a night section. So in other words, we try and accommodate to the best of our ability to have night sections. So in many cases, the answer will be night. However, just depending on the way the cookie crumbles, you may have to take one or more courses during the day. And so trying to work out that with your manager, with your employer, I think is a really important thing. I have 3 master's degrees under my belt. I did all 3 of them part-time, and that means I'm pretty good at knowing what that looks like. It's actually not that hard an ask, depending on the kind of work environment you have, to say, hey, this term I need Wednesday afternoons, or this term I need Friday mornings. So it can be asked, especially when you start to be able to show how you're bringing knowledge back, how you're bringing things back into the workplace. But in many cases, it'll be evening. Now, not everyone's got the energy in the evening. So the fact that that may be convenient doesn't necessarily mean that it suits your metabolism. Some people are energetic in the evening, but if you've worked a long day, then to do classes in the evening, I've done a lot of that. It does require stamina. So sometimes choosing the course during the day, if you're able to negotiate that with your employer, is actually a more humane experience. Oh, Taryn, so male to female ratio in the program. So if we looked at our student body in its entirety, it's probably about 65% women, 35% men. I'm guessing that's probably about right, but it's not evenly distributed in concentration. So some concentrations like RM and LIS tend to be women dominated. ISD, human-centered data science, tend to be male. UXD tends to be more female. KMIM, I think it's probably just about even. So there's a bit of a stereotypical division that the ones that are more oriented to humans tend to be more popular with women, and concentrations that are more oriented to tools and technology tend to be more popular with men. I think we probably could do a better job with our recruitment, but of course, we admit you to the program. We don't admit you to the concentration. So there really is a lot of self-selecting there. So the gender biases that we see, I wish we didn't have them. I wish things were more uniform, but that's the way self-selection happens. But overall, it is and always has been, the information professions overall have always been more dominated by women than men. All right, good questions. Yeah, anything else about student life at U of T? Some of you may have been at U of T, maybe not. I've done all my degrees at U of T. I've been around for a long time, so it's pretty hard to stump me. Any other questions? Wondering what I can say to fill the long pregnant pauses. I kind of gave you my best stuff in my introduction. All right, I have a master's thesis student this year who's in KMIM, and she is doing, her project is the information and knowledge practices of UX designers. So that's a really nice cross-concentration project. So she's interested really in how do UX designers get better at their jobs. Some of them are the only practitioners in the organization, some have a whole tribe. Do they talk to each other? Do they take courses? Do they hang out and do hackathons on weekends? What do they read? So it's not about who their clients are or what happens at work. It's how do they, as practicing professionals, get better at what they do. So she's doing her data collection now. She's interviewing user experience designers. She's using what's called a grounded theory approach, which is we don't have a hypothesis that we're trying to test. It's an exploratory question saying, what's the phenomenon? What do people do? Are there commonalities? Is there divergence? And I think this is going to be a very interesting thesis. Any other questions? Don't hold back. Questions that you sort of feel like might be a dumb question. There are no dumb questions. Scout's honor. No dumb questions. Especially if you don't know U of T, especially if you don't know Toronto, and especially if you haven't already been to graduate school. Quiet group. Well, Kevin, go ahead. You're not. No, you got me in suspense. You're not sure if it's been mentioned, but it has not. And this answer kind of surprises people. Yes, there is. We're in business 12 months of the year. The way fees work is you pay fees for the fall and the winter, and then summer is free. In other words, you, by being a full-time student, paying your fees, you pay your fees essentially in two blocks, some fall term, winter term, but that makes you a full-time student for 12 months. And so you can take courses in the summer, and there's no charge to doing that because we don't charge by the course. we charge you by the year of enrollment. And some students take a course in the summer. Some of them do a co-op placement in the summer, which is also a course. Some students load up and do a lot of courses in the summer, and that allows them to work part-time during the year, that they may only take, say, 3 courses during the year. So there is that flexibility, certainly. And it also means that you can take courses in the summer after second year. In other words, instead of finishing your degree in April and graduate in June, you can finish your degree in August and graduate in November. And it works out to be the same. So that flexibility is what allows us to do things like co-op, right? That takes you out of class for a while. Pardon me. I'll also say we tend not to offer required courses in the summer. The summer tends to have more of a focus on electives. Some required courses are also very popular as electives, so sometimes we do. But generally, when you're looking at how can you manage this, if you're thinking about a map, think about getting your required courses done in the fall and the winter and electives in the summer. My pleasure. Any other questions? I should have prepared more stuff to talk about. I can talk about my doctoral research, which is in KMIM. Why don't I? I think I abhor a silence. So I studied an engineering firm, and I was interested in they were introducing a new optional tool called Knowledge Form, and it was really meant for these engineers to be able to document not formally procedures and practices because they have ways of doing that, but more the informal messiness of getting together and solving a problem, working something out, figuring something out, and then being able to document that. So basically it allowed for people to do online question and answer and conversation and argue, and then you could actually package all that up and say, here's the conversation for a particular decision or a particular finding or a particular insight or a particular belief, which means you can go back in time sometimes and say, you know, we started doing that a certain way or we made a certain decision. What was the reasoning behind that? And that was understood to be an effective way to bring new people into the organization, to say all this tacit knowledge, all the stuff that we've talked about and figured out, we've actually documented that in these conversations. And so you can dig down, start with a policy or a decision or a principle, and start reading back in terms of how people talked about that. The engineers hated it. They actually really hated it. But that wasn't what I was interested in. I was interested in, will people use this for knowledge sharing simply that it's been given to them? And how is that related to ways that we can measure or gauge organizational culture or information culture, organizational culture and information use? So I had some dimensions: information sharing and proactive use of information and information transparency. And I tried a bunch of different existing survey instruments, as well as doing interviews, and I compared that to actual use, because the system actually tracked how much people used it. I found some interesting things, mostly that the group overall didn't like this very much. But we could divide people into two. There were people, and this is actually kind of interesting, there were people who shared, that is, people who posted, and there were people who consumed, and they tended to be different people. In other words, you tended to be a sharer or a consumer, but not usually both. And if you think about social media, I think it tends to behave about the same, that there's some people who do all the sharing, and there's some people who do all the reading, and not that many people do a lot of both at the same time. In the engineering firm, it was actually 10% sharers, 90% consumers. I think that ratio may change depending on context. But that's interesting because it suggests that you should probably be designing differently, or considering carefully that there may be very distinct needs between people who see themselves as sharers and people who see themselves as consumers. And that's not a design process that gets considered very often. So it's something interesting to inform things like intranet design. And how that did not unleash a flood of questions, I do not know. Any other questions? I think a couple people have joined more recently. I can't keep track. I see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of you. You're sitting on a question. I know you are. You want to type it, but there's something holding you back. But Really, there shouldn't. There are no dumb questions. And if a question's been asked already, I don't mind. I'm happy to answer it again. Any other thoughts? Ah, Olivia, awesome. You just joined. Excellent. All right, you're breaking up the pregnant pause. Thank you. Not a problem if it's been answered before. What's the difference between knowledge management and information management? No, it's actually a great question. I tried to get at it a bit in my introductory thing, but I only get 5 minutes. So really what you're asking is, how do we deal with the fact that information and knowledge are different? So the facile answer, the simple answer, is that information's in documents and knowledge is in the head. That's not fully true. That's not entirely correct. It'll do for now. So information management is very much around, hey, we've got this collection of documents in our organization, like quite a lot. How do we organize them? And by default, organizations have the shared drive, the H drive, often it's called, and it's a mess. Or things are stored in inboxes. How often have you said, oh, I think I have that. Let me search my email for it. So those are information management problems. And if we distill it even more, we could say we need to be very concerned with specific kinds of information in organizations called records. And certain kinds of information qualify as a record if it meets certain conditions, and then there's more rules around what we do. But information management is broader than records management, and it really gets at how do we deal with these different repositories? Can we come up with an intranet that allows people to find what they're looking for? So that's the information management side, and it's concerned with metadata and standards, and it's closer to librarianship and records management than anything else. Knowledge management is very much about what goes on here. So you're thinking about organizational culture, you're thinking about expertise, you're thinking about sharing, you're thinking about what happens when people leave an organization. So you're far more concerned about behavior, you're far more concerned about policy, you're far more concerned about culture. And so, as I said, and far more concerned about those things, but also how do you extract knowledge? I mean, how do you can convert knowledge into information. I can take what I know and I can write it down. I can write a paper and I can give that to you and you can read it. So I've degraded knowledge down to information. I've given it to you and you can read it. And if you know enough to make sense of what it is I'm talking about, you can integrate that new information with what you already know and build knowledge. But if you don't have enough of a background to be able to make sense of what I'm reading, that is, I've written a paper for experts and say you're not one, it stays as information. And so when we talk about information overload, we're really talking about that barrier between information in the environment and what you're able to actually pass through the eye of the needle into your mind and be able to have and know. So information management is very much documents. Knowledge management is very much people. Comment. Something that did speak to me, as you mentioned in the previous presentation, that we shape the tools we use or shaped by those same tools. So that's very much of a culture and technology perspective, and I think it's a very valuable perspective. In knowledge management, what I would say is there's a resistance to being shaped by tools, and the resistance is actually organizational culture. So when we think about wider society, yeah, social media has changed how we think of what friends are. It's changed how we communicate with people. It's absolutely huge. In an organization, the norms that exist, the organizational culture that exists tends to be really strong and tends to really resist change. And so we actually see greater resistance to change in organizations, greater resistance to being shaped by our tools. As for shaping our tools, there is a thing within knowledge management or phenomenon called appropriation of technology. And that's really neat. That means sometimes a system is designed to be used in a certain way, and the people who are forced to use it or asked to use it find other ways to use it. So they do shape it. They can sometimes undermine it a bit or use it for purposes that were not entirely meant for, sometimes very creative, sometimes very defensive. So those forces are at work in organizations, but they tend to be weaker in an organization where you have formal policies and organizational culture than in the broader society where there's just everything is more loosely coupled. But it is an interesting phenomenon. I'm glad that spoke to you because I think that's actually really worth thinking about. Olivia asks, would I say that the concentration is more of a tech STEM focus than concentrations like ARM or LIS? No, I wouldn't say it does. I have to say I wouldn't say it does. I think if you had to divide the world into STEM and not STEM, it would be in the not STEM category. It's closer to ARM and less. But I think it's closer to ARM and less. Okay, it sits between ARM and less and data science and information systems. So it is between them. But I honestly I really do have to place it on the people side rather than the tech side. Yeah, that's a good question to ask. But it's close to the tech. And that's why I think it's a very useful concentration. Someone in ISD may not really be able to make the cognitive leap to ARM, but they could take a KMIM course or two and go, oh, I can see how to connect that to my practice. So it's a good bridge. It's a good bridge, or it's a good mortar between these bricks. Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. Kevin, does this concentration focus on information security? We used to have information security, and it was really more, I think, in critical information policy studies, actually. But we don't have an information security person. So that actually is a gap that we have these days. We talk a little bit about it. There would be a little bit of coverage in culture and technology, a little bit of coverage in information policy studies. I talk about security in INF 1003, so there's a class on that. Security more broadly than information security, but it's included in there. So there's a class on that in 1003, but it is not, we do not go deep in any of those as far as I know. We do have a co-op position in information security though, and it's usually a KMIM person. So there is that. And that's actually at U of T Information Security. Any other thoughts or questions or comments? We might have Olivia left. I think we have some new arrivals. Oh, I see Kate. Hello, you are new. Feel free to ask questions. Oh, and Kate left. I frightened her away. And oh, Kevin again. Okay, great question. Actually, I'm very well equipped to answer that particular one because I teach the course called the Emerging Professional. I think it's growing increasingly problematic to talk about an information professional because it suggests that it's a thing. I think it's better these days to talk about the information professions. When we used to be able to talk about an information professional, we were kind of talking about librarians and archivists, maybe records managers, and we were really talking about them as an amorphous group. It's like you could work in a public library, you could work in a corporation, you're an information professional because you deal with that. So I think it's better now to talk about the information professions, and I think it's better for us to spend more time talking about differentiation rather than the commonalities. So to answer your question, what does it mean to be an information professional? It means to inhabit a niche that relates to how information and knowledge pervades society and the impact that that has, which can be economic, it can be social, it can be political, it can even be military, it can even be religious, but for the most part, social, political, technical. So it's, and the sands are really shifting very quickly. So being an information professional is also really, really being on the windward side of the human ship, that you are buffeted by things that are new on an increasing basis. And artificial intelligence, I think, is a really prime example of that. That information professionals, people who are in the information professions, actually need to be strongly committed to continuous learning. If you don't do continuous learning, you end up, I think, obsolete pretty darn quickly. So it's a challenging domain to be in, but increasingly important. Also, unregulated and not necessarily having the status that they need to have, the information professions. It would be better if we were quasi-regulated. It would be better if you had to be a licensed information profession. And we may get there one day. But whereas many professions are on the decline, I think information professions are actually on the rise, at least in their relevance, if not in their status. Any other questions? Any new arrivals? Rose is here. I see Rose has been here since the beginning. Rose, do you have any questions? Oh, and Ivy is here. Hi, Ivy. You're the latest arrival. Pleased to meet you. Sort of meet you. And if you have any questions, I'm all ears. Oh, no, she ran away. Maybe I shouldn't be doing that. I'm scaring people away. So I've got just Kevin, Rose, and Taryn. Oh, thank you. I'm glad. It's fascinating. You're actually asking a really good, really hard question. And honestly, I think everyone's going to have to build their own answer to that question over their 2 years in the program. Yeah. I did my master's at the iSchool in the 90s, and it was obviously the world was a different place that long ago. The school was a different place. The curriculum was entirely different. So we move in academic terms. We move and evolve at the speed of light. We are very changing, and I see that as a strength. It can be bewildering, but I see it as a strength. Rose, okay. Why would I say this is the biggest benefit taking this concentration of the other options? Um, I guess I don't like doing them as sort of competing with each other. But let me tell you what I think what the biggest differentiator for KMIM is its ability to be mortared between bricks. It's so situated in working in organizations and working with other people that I think it can take what you learn in other concentrations and elevate you. So I think its greatest strength is actually what it can do to elevate other concentrations as well. If you're taking it just as a primary concentration, it is best to do that if you've already had some professional experience, some work experience in managing information or managing teams. Then I think it can really elevate you to be a great manager, to be a great leader, to be an effective information professional in an organization. So for that particular population, I think there's no concentration better than to up your career, than to bring you back to an organization able to be far more effective and able to contribute far more effectively. But for most students, and our students do skew younger, I think it is the ability of KMIM to make relevant to work practice what you learn in other concentrations. So it is, I believe, it is the largest. It's a small concentration, but it is the largest second concentration. That's a great question, actually. Thank you. And there's a lot of students who mix KMIM and ARM. Those two are very, very in lockstep. Taryn asked, do we focus on, hang on, let me go back to the chat when it just disappeared. Focus on the transition of information and knowledge and how they are presented. We get a chance to learn about decision making. So you're in your question, you're framing the course 2176, which is information management in organizations. That's actually our flagship knowledge management course, and it focuses exactly on what you're talking about. We use Chun-Wei Chu's model of what he calls information, what he calls the knowing organization. So there's a relationship between encountering information and doing what's called sense making, figuring out what it means, and that means holding it up in context, how it comes in the organization, through whom, what it's said to mean. That's a basis for doing what's called knowledge creation, or making. That's when that comes into your head and you're able to wield it and use it, and you use the knowledge that you've created based on the sense making of the information that's come in to make decisions. So it's a model with 3 pillars: sense making, knowledge creation, and decision making. So that's the model, the main knowledge management model that we use. In the management course, 1230, Information Management in Organizations, we also look at management theory and decision making, so that you get it there too. And I suspect you probably do in records management as well. Yeah, so you come at it a few different ways. And the bad news with decision making is most decision making in organizations is really irrational and doesn't match theory at all. But at least if you know the theory, then you're able to make sense of what is not being done well in an organization, right? So using theory to measure deficit or measure dysfunction in an organization is actually a very useful yardstick to be able to have. But I think it's really important when you learn about decision making, you're learning about what ought to happen, not necessarily what does. Yeah, it's really interesting stuff. And Kevin asked, do I see any current technological innovation that's going to challenge or change how we view KMIM? The main one is artificial intelligence. Everything else, it's really more of the same. The big boost. I mean, what made KMIM possible in the first place was Y2K. Was the arrival of the new millennium and the replacement of a lot of very old information systems with new ones that allowed you to do things like search for information all the way across the enterprise, that allowed relational databases to be built. A lot of capability was created. So I would say knowledge management was kind of really born at the beginning of the 21st century, even though the term had been in use before then, for sure. It's a 1990s term, but it didn't really become something you could do until after 2000. And so 2 decades later, after we've explored things like knowledge mobilization and knowledge translation and knowledge exchange, so these various different branches of knowledge management have developed. Now I think the big one is artificial intelligence, which ought to be able to, look, at its best, you don't actually need to manage knowledge anymore. You can just get artificial intelligence to answer things on the fly and to figure these things out, right? Of course, there's still going to be knowledge in people's heads. And that may well be the new boundary of knowledge management, is what is the relationship between knowledge in people's heads and what artificial intelligence is able to extract from the environment. So in a sense, it ought to be a huge expander. So when I say a challenge, I don't, on one hand, you could see, yeah, knowledge, we don't need knowledge management anymore. Artificial intelligence will do it all. But I actually don't believe that. I actually think that you're going to need more ability to actually make judgments, that artificial intelligence will be able to do a lot of processing and be able to give you a lot of options and be able to give you a lot of what ifs and a lot of possibilities, but that humans are still going to really have to manage the last step of decision making, and trying to parse and trying to make sense of. So artificial intelligence is saying that we could or should do this or that. Now, why is that, and with what ramification? So forward-looking things too are going to, I think, remain in the province of KMIM. But I think that's going to look quite different. When I think about law firms, for example, law firms are very, very oriented toward knowledge management, because they are very, very heavy. It's a very, very knowledge-heavy environment, and information-heavy as well. Now that you've got artificial intelligence, you can do things like read contracts. You're actually going to completely reform, or you have the opportunity to completely reform how lawyers do their work. So if you're going to change a profession profoundly, you're probably going to change the knowledge management activities associated with that profession pretty profoundly too. A lot of crystal ball there. What we don't really know is where we're going to find that line. Where we're going to find the line that artificial intelligence can't cross in terms of being able to make us smarter, being able to make us make better decisions. So it's a long way of saying I think artificial intelligence will be really useful decision support, which is very, very useful in turn for KMIM. It doesn't threaten its existence, but it will fundamentally change, I think, what we find is important. Any other questions? Do I have new rifles? Okay, I hope I didn't scare you away, Kevin. No, we still have a small room. And we have one of the leading thinkers in artificial intelligence and its place in the information professions, which is Brian Cantwell-Smith. And he's got a fantastic book. See, if I was in my office, I'm looking at a few books I have here. It's called something like The Role of Artificial Intelligence, Judgment and Reckoning. It used to be called Judgment and Reckoning, or Reckoning and Judgment. Anyway, Brian Cantwell-Smith, fantastic book. That's an absolutely fantastic book. And this is stuff he's been working on for a very long time. He's a philosopher, a computer scientist, and an information studies person. So pretty broad and deep. Increasingly, Kevin, the ramifications of AI will be talked about more within the program. I mean, essentially, data science is already right on the cusp there, right? So data science and artificial intelligence are not the same thing, but they're pretty connected. And so, our expansion there, I think, is a commitment to embracing artificial intelligence and bringing it in. How we do that, usually in the olden days, things were born in the academy and moved into industry. Now technology changes so fast that there's actually a little bit of a reverse, is that we see technology appearing in industry first, which is great and also risky, because the kinds of reflection and discourse around what are these things good for, what should we use them for, what shouldn't we, what are the ramifications, that actually tends to be slower. Although artificial intelligence has been moving at a very, very fast speed, we've been moving, I would say, as fast as we can, but never fast enough to start to accommodate that, to start to talk about artificial intelligence and what that means for the information professions. Oh, the book again, Reckoning and Judgment. Hang on, you know what? I'm just gonna got a browser open here. I'm just gonna open a new tab, and I will find it for you, so I can tell you exactly what it's called. Great book. The Promise of Artificial Intelligence, Reckoning and Judgment. That is the title. Promise of Artificial Intelligence, Reckoning and Judgment, and it's by Brian Cantwell-Smith. Yeah, great reading over the holidays. All right, my pleasure. Any other questions? Big smile from Kevin. Oh, actually, it's almost 3 o'clock. Wow, last time I looked at the clock, it was like 20 past 2, and it's like, wow, we've got a long time to spend here. Okay, fantastic. Okay. Well, let me see what's next for you guys. The optional virtual tour. So you got that going on. Yeah. Nicole, Roshni, and Kelsey, yes. Good, okay. Well, I think the tour is worth it because I do believe, as I said before, that we will be substantially in person in the fall when you guys arrive. That's my belief. All right, any last closing questions? Any advice? Any advice? Any advice? Any advice? Okay, sure, I can give you. That's a pretty broad question. For your statement, if you're applying your statement of intent, or whatever the statement is called, you're going to want to be specific. Even if you've got ambivalence, I think you're going to want to land on the concentration and say, this is why I would be good for this. I think showing ambivalence, not being sure why you want to come, doesn't read as well. I welcome that ambivalence. I don't think the ambivalence is a problem at all. In fact, quite the contrary. I think the iSchool is a great place to show up being unsure of what's going to tickle your fancy, because that's just what buffet tables are best for. And I talk about our offerings as a buffet table with immense variety. But for your statement, I think it's good to be focused. And you're admitted to the program, not the concentration, so you're not painting yourself into a corner, but I think you can be clearest about your capacity, clearest about your capability, clearest about your passion when you're being specific. So that's my advice on applying, is to do that. My pleasure. Thanks for your questions, Kevin, and everyone else. Great. No, I'm glad. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Taryn. All right. Well, I think it's time for us to, this is 2:56, and I think we've done all our questions. So I'm going to sign out. Pleasure chatting with you guys. Good luck with your applications, and I hope to see you, expect to see you in September. And when I see you, I mean literally see you, not just an image of you on the screen. All right. Take care, everyone. Have yourselves a great day. Enjoy the virtual tour and the rest of the information day. Take care now.